Ready, set?
Somebody out there could have gotten hold of me if the effort would have been put into it. Certainly.
But they didn't.
But they didn't, no. And there were absolutely signs all throughout my childhood that there was something wrong. And nobody stopped to really check into that. So I was just left to destruct.
Protesters came in support of Karla Faye Tucker and in support of executing her.
It is a tear in the fabric of society when a murder happens. The death penalty is the thread and needle to sew it back together again.
Tucker, in 1983, was convicted of killing Lynn Dean with a pickaxe and admitted killing Thornton's wife, Deborah. Tucker found God and turned her life around, apparently. Enough for forgiveness from Texas Governor George W. Bush, but not a reprieve.
The courts, including the United States Supreme Court, have reviewed the legal issues in this case, and therefore I will not grant a 30-day stay. May God bless Karla Faye Tucker, and God bless her victims and their families.
February 3rd, 1998, Huntsville, Texas, 6:45 in the evening. Inside the Huntsville unit, a woman takes her last breath. The doctors step forward. They check. They confirm. She is gone. 38 years old, dead by lethal injection. Outside those prison walls, nearly 200 journalists from around the world are standing in the dark. Some people hold candles. A gospel singer lifts her voice into the night air. On the other side of the fence, another crowd is screaming, not in grief, but in celebration. Her name is Karla Faye Tucker, and she has just become the first woman executed in the state of Texas in 135 years. Her last words were not angry, they were not bitter. She looked at the people watching her die and said, "I am going to be face to face with Jesus now. I will see you all when you get there." But 15 years before that quiet goodbye, inside a Houston apartment, 2 people were killed with a pickaxe. One weapon, one night, and one of those bodies was found with the pickaxe still buried in her chest. What drove a woman to that apartment, and what she did inside it, is a story that will stop you cold. Welcome back, or if you are new here, welcome. This channel covers real cases, verified facts, and real people. If that is the standard you are looking for, subscribe now and hit the bell. Let us get into it. Before we talk about what happened inside that apartment, you need to know who was inside it. Because this story is not just about a killer. It is about 2 people who did absolutely nothing wrong and never made it out alive. Lynn Dean was born on May 31, 1956, in Smith County, Texas. He was the youngest of 3 brothers. All 3 of them served in the military. That upbringing gave Jerry something that stuck with him his whole life: a sense of discipline, a love of hard work, a belief that you showed up and you got things done. When Houston's oil boom pulled people into the city in the late 1970s, Jerry was among them. The city's population had surged past 1.6 million people. Jerry came looking for opportunity. He found it. He got steady work as a cable television installer. Nothing flashy, but he was reliable, self-sufficient, and he handled his business. Outside of work, motorcycles were everything to him. He restored them. He rode them. He was deeply rooted inside Houston's tight-knit biker community. That was his world. His marriage to a woman named Shawn Jackson had begun to fall apart. The separation was painful, and somewhere in that wreckage, someone connected to Shawn had already decided she hated him. Jerry had no idea. Deborah Ruth Thornton was born on May 10, 1951, in Columbus, Ohio. Her full name was Deborah Ruth Carlson Davis Thornton. Her early life was not easy. Her biological father had a criminal history that broke the family apart. Her mother rebuilt everything from nothing. She remarried, and both Deborah and her brother, Ronald Carlson, were adopted into the new household. Deborah eventually made her way to Houston. She was working at a trailer manufacturing company. She had a son, William Joseph Davis, from a previous marriage. She was now married to Richard Thornton. On the night of June 12, 1983, Deborah and Richard argued. She left the house. She went to a party across town. And at that party, for the very first time in her life, she met Jerry Lynn Dean. They had no history together, no shared past, no reason their paths should have ever crossed. One night brought them together. Neither one of them made it home. Now you need to understand the woman who walked through that apartment door. Karla Faye Tucker was born on November 18, 1959, in Houston, Texas. She was the youngest of three sisters. Her father, Larry Tucker, worked as a longshoreman. Her mother, Carolyn Moore Tucker, started out as a homemaker, but the marriage did not last. Her parents divorced when Karla was around 10 years old, and during those proceedings, she found out something that shook her to her core. She had been conceived during an affair. The man who had been raising her was not her biological father. Her biological father was a Houston firefighter of Greek ethnicity, a man she barely knew. The damage from that revelation ran deep. By the age of 8, she was already using drugs. By 14, she had dropped out of school entirely. She followed her mother into prostitution and spent her teenage years traveling across the country with rock bands. No structure, no stability, no safety net. At 16, she married a mechanic named Stephen Griffith. That marriage collapsed too. On the day of her execution, Griffith told the Houston Chronicle something that has stayed with people ever since. He said, "She always said that someday she would be famous." By her early 20s, Tucker was fully embedded in Houston's biker scene. Drugs were not occasional, they were daily. They were constant. It was through her close friendship with Shawn Jackson, Jerry Dean's estranged wife, that Tucker met Daniel Ryan Garrett in 1981. Garrett was 37, Tucker was 21. They became a couple almost immediately. What Tucker felt for Shawn was fierce and protective. And what she felt for Jerry Dean, the man she believed had hurt Shawn, was pure, growing hatred. Layer that hatred on top of daily drug use and a man who had access to weapons and no fear of consequences. What happened at the 3-day party that followed would set off a chain of events that court records describe as one of the most brutal crimes in Houston's history. It started as a birthday party. Between June 11th and June 13th, 1983, Tucker and Garrett hosted a 3-day gathering at their home on McKinn Street in Houston. The occasion was Carrie Ann's birthday. The people there were familiar faces: Carrie Burrell, Ronnie Burrell, and James Leibrandt. But this was not a normal celebration. Court records document exactly what was consumed over those 3 consecutive days: Placidils, Dilaudid, Valium, Mandrex, cocaine, bathtub speed, alcohol, all of it layered together, hour after hour, without interruption, for 3 straight days. Then Shawn Dean walked through the door. She was visibly injured. The confrontation with her estranged husband, Jerry Dean, had left marks. Tucker saw it immediately, and something inside her shifted. Tucker's dislike of Jerry Dean was not new. She had hated him since she found out he had been abusive toward Shawn. But seeing her friend standing there, hurt, turned that hatred into something that demanded action. Garrett had his own reason to go to Dean's apartment. He wanted the motorcycle, the parts. That was the original plan. Theft, not murder. But Tucker had a key that Shawn had reportedly lost. A key that opened Jerry Dean's front door. Drugs, rage, a key in her hand. In the early hours of June 13th, the decision was made. They were going to Dean's apartment, and James Leibrandt was going with them. 3 people left McKinn Street in the early hours of June 13th, 1983. Karla Faye Tucker, Danny Garrett, and James Leibrandt. According to court records, the stated objective was straightforward: get to Jerry Dean's apartment, take his motorcycle, or at the very least, strip it down for parts. That was the plan on paper. Tucker held the key. She had found it among Shawn's belongings. That key gave them access to everything. No weapons left McKinn Street with them that night. Not a single one. What happened inside that apartment was carried out with tools that were already there, tools that belonged to Jerry Dean himself. Garrett found a ball-peen hammer lying on the floor of Dean's bedroom. The 3-foot pickaxe was one of Dean's own work tools. Librant's job was simple: stay outside, find Dean's El Camino. Tucker and Garrett went in together. Court records do not document a formal plan to kill anyone that night. But what the prosecution argued, and what the jury ultimately accepted, was that once Tucker and Garrett were inside that apartment, every decision they made was deliberate. Tucker later spoke openly about what happened in there, to multiple people. Those conversations were recorded, and those recordings became the backbone of the case against her. Before we go any further, if you are watching this channel for the first time, this is what we do here: real cases, real people, verified facts, no shortcuts. Subscribe and join thousands of viewers who come here for exactly this standard. Now, back to June 13th, 1983. Around 3 o'clock in the morning on June 13th, 1983, 3 people climbed into a vehicle and drove away from McKinn Street. Tucker, Garrett, Librant. The streets of Houston were quiet. Most people were asleep. Jerry Dean had no idea anyone was coming. When they reached the apartment complex, Librant stayed outside. His job was to find Dean's El Camino. Tucker and Garrett moved toward the front door. Tucker slid the key in. The door opened. They were inside. The apartment was dark. Dean was in his bedroom, asleep. Garrett moved through the room and spotted a ball-peen hammer lying on the floor. He picked it up. He used it to strike Jerry Dean. Dean woke up fighting. The struggle was immediate and violent. Tucker grabbed a 3-foot pickaxe from the room, one of Dean's own work tools, and joined the attack. Court records confirm that both Tucker and Garrett struck Dean. This was not one person's crime. Both of them were in that room. Both of them participated. Then Garrett left the bedroom to strip parts from Dean's motorcycle elsewhere in the apartment. Tucker stayed behind, alone, in that room, with Dean. And that is when she found her. Pressed against the wall, hidden beneath the bed covers, was a woman, Deborah Ruth Thornton. She had gone home with Jerry Dean after the party that night. She had seen everything that had just happened. She had witnessed all of it. Tucker came at her with the pickaxe. Garrett returned to the room and finished the assault. When it was over, the pickaxe was left where it landed, embedded in Deborah Thornton's chest. Jerry Lynn Dean and Deborah Ruth Thornton were both dead. Tucker and Garrett took Dean's wallet, his motorcycle parts, and his El Camino. Tucker got behind the wheel and drove directly to the apartment of Doug Garrett, Danny's brother. She told him what had happened. Dean's wallet was handed over. Doug burned its contents and threw the wallet away. The motorcycle parts were stored briefly, then dumped into the Brazos River. The El Camino was abandoned in a parking lot near the Astrodome. Every single one of those actions was later documented and entered into evidence at trial. The following morning, a man named Gregory Scott Trevor showed up at Dean's apartment expecting a ride to work. He noticed the motorcycle was gone. The television had been moved. Something felt wrong. He stepped inside. He found both bodies. Houston police opened a homicide investigation that same morning. Detectives arrived. The scene was processed. And for the next 5 weeks, investigators had almost nothing to go on. Then a single phone call changed everything. Tucker and Garrett came back in the pre-dawn hours of June 13th. They walked back into their world as though nothing had happened. No panic, no silence, no sign that 2 people were lying dead across town. But Tucker could not stay quiet. She talked. That is the part that matters. She did not lay low. She did not keep the night to herself. She described the attack to people in her circle, in graphic detail. She even exaggerated her own role in it. She wanted to be seen as tough, as fearless, as someone the men around her could respect. She told her own sister, Carrie Burrell, what had happened. Court records confirm that Tucker spoke openly about that night to multiple people, and every single conversation brought her one step closer to a prison cell. This was never about insurance money. There was no financial scheme behind it. It started as theft, a motorcycle. and became something far worse once they were inside that apartment. Richard Thornton was notified that his wife, Deborah, was dead. He had not even known where she was that night. Ronald Carlson received the news that his sister was gone. He would carry that grief for years, and where it eventually took him, nobody saw coming. Houston Police Homicide Division opened the case on the morning of June 13, 1983. Detectives processed the scene. They recovered the pickaxe. They recovered the hammer. The physical evidence was there, but a crime scene tells you what happened. It does not always tell you who did it. There was no digital footprint to follow, no forensic technology of the kind that exists today, and without a clear suspect trail, the investigation went quiet. 5 weeks passed. Nothing moved. Meanwhile, Tucker was not lying low. She was still talking, still describing that night to people around her, still acting like someone who believed she would never be caught. One of the people listening was Doug Garrett, Danny's brother. Doug's girlfriend was Carrie Burrell. Carrie was Tucker's own sister. That connection meant Doug was hearing things from inside the circle, details that were becoming impossible to ignore. He could not stay quiet any longer. On July 20th, 1983, Doug Garrett picked up the phone and called homicide detective J.C. Mosier. That single phone call broke the case wide open. What happened when Detective Mosier sat across from Doug Garrett, and what Doug agreed to do next, is the moment this entire case turned. The day after Doug's phone call, Detective Mosier sat down with Doug Garrett and Carrie Burrell. He listened. He assessed, and then he made a decision. He asked Doug to wear a wire. Doug said yes. A few days later, Doug climbed onto his motorcycle and rode to the McKinn Street house, the same house where the 3-day party had taken place. He sat down with Tucker and Danny Garrett, casual, relaxed, like a family visit. That conversation lasted 90 minutes. Every word was recorded. On that tape, Tucker described the attack on Jerry Dean in her own words. What she did, what she felt, her voice, her account, unprompted, unfiltered. She had been telling this story to people for weeks, and now she had told it directly into a hidden microphone. That recording became the foundation of the prosecution's entire case. On July 20th, 1983, the same day Doug made that first call, Tucker, Garrett, Lee Brandt, and Ronnie Burrell were all arrested. In September of 1983, Tucker and Garrett were formally indicted for the capital murders of Jerry Lynn Dean and Deborah Ruth Thornton. Their trials would be held separately. The prosecution had 3 pillars: the wire recording, Carrie Burrell's direct testimony, Tucker's own sister speaking against her in court, and Tucker's own words, captured on tape. They did not need much else. Danny Garrett was convicted separately and also sentenced to death. But he never reached the execution chamber. He died inside prison from a liver ailment in 1993. Only Tucker remained. Tucker's trial opened on April 19, 1984, in the 180th Judicial District Court of Harris County, Texas. The presiding judge was Patricia Lykos. The formal indictment had been filed on September 13, 1983. The charge was capital murder of Jerry Lynn Dean during the commission of a robbery. Jury selection alone took 5 full weeks, running from March 2nd through April 9, 1984. Testimony began on April 11th and concluded on April 18th. Final arguments were heard on April 19th. The jury returned its verdict that same day. District Attorney John B. Holmes, Jr. built the prosecution around 3 things: the wire recording obtained by Detective Mosier, the live testimony of Carrie Burrell, Tucker's own sister, sitting in that courtroom and speaking against her, and Tucker's own recorded words, played for the jury to hear in her own voice. Defense attorney George McCall Seacrest Jr. pushed back. He argued Tucker had been severely impaired by multiple substances on the night of the crime. He challenged the effectiveness of her legal counsel. He questioned whether the jury instructions had been properly given. The jury was not moved. The punishment phase ran from April 23rd through April 25th, 1984. Tucker took the stand herself. She told the court that even being subjected to what her victims suffered would not be enough to make up for what she had done. The jury answered both special questions required under Texas law. Yes, the crime was deliberate. Yes, she posed a future danger to society. On April 25, 1984, Karla Faye Tucker was sentenced to death by lethal injection. She appealed. The case, Tucker versus State, was taken up by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. In 1988, that court affirmed the conviction and the sentence. Every door closed, one by one. Karla Faye Tucker was assigned inmate number 777 by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. She was transferred to the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas, and placed on death row. What happened inside that unit over the next 14 years was not part of any program. Nobody required it. Nobody rewarded it. In October of 1983, months before her trial had even begun, Tucker picked up a Bible through a prison ministry program. She read it alone in her cell. She later described what happened next. She said she did not fully understand what she was reading, and before she knew it, she was on her knees on the floor of her cell, asking God to forgive her. She converted to Christianity that same month. Over the years that followed, she completed her GED. She led voluntary Bible study sessions. She counseled other women on death row, women who had no outside support, no visitors, nobody checking on them. The warden of the Huntsville unit later testified on record that Tucker was a model prisoner and that after 14 years, she had in all likelihood been genuinely reformed. That statement came from a corrections official with no political stake in the outcome. In March of 1989, novelist Beverly Lowry began visiting Tucker at Mountain View. Those visits eventually became the foundation of her book, Crossed Over, A Murder, a Memoir. In 1995, Tucker married Reverend Dana Lane Brown, a prison minister who had been part of her faith journey for years. The ceremony was held inside the prison walls. By the mid-1990s, her case had become an international conversation. Pat Robertson, a lifelong supporter of capital punishment, publicly called for her sentence to be commuted. Jerry Falwell went on television and said Tucker had made him reconsider his position. Pope John Paul II sent a formal appeal directly to Governor George W. Bush. Italian Prime Minister Romano Prodi added his voice. Newt Gingrich, the World Council of Churches, and Amnesty International all followed. Ronald Carlson, the brother of Deborah Thornton, one of the women Tucker had been convicted of killing, had initially supported the execution. Then he went through his own religious conversion. By 1998, he was one of the most vocal opponents of her sentence being carried out. Richard Thornton, Deborah's husband, never wavered, not once. Execution night, February 3, 1998. On February 2nd, Tucker was transported by state aircraft, 160 miles, from the Mountain View unit in Gatesville to the Huntsville unit. The execution was set for the following evening. Alan Polinsky, chairman of the Texas Board of Criminal Justice, came to her cell that night. Someone offered him a chair. He refused it. He sat down on the concrete floor instead, because he did not want to be looking down at her. Tucker handed him a 3-page document. Not a plea for mercy, not a personal appeal. It was a structured proposal for prison reform, covering inmate labor programs, post-release accountability, and support systems for women still inside. Her husband, Dana Brown, visited through the glass. They could not touch. In their final moments together, they reached toward each other and shook hands through the barrier. Tucker was brought to tears. It was the last time they would ever make physical contact. Her final meal was a banana, a peach, and a garden salad with ranch dressing. She was offered a sedative before the execution. She declined it. She wanted to be fully present for what was coming. Women's chaplain Cheryl Archer arrived at 3:30 in the afternoon and sat with Tucker on the floor, holding her hands through the bars. Cheryl read aloud a note from Tucker's attorney. The Fifth Circuit Court had denied the final appeal. Tucker looked down, then she looked up and said, "I am at peace with this. Tell the women to forgive." At 6:12 in the evening, Governor Bush's office formally confirmed the execution would proceed. At 6:37, the three-drug protocol began. At 6:45 in the evening on February 3, 1998, Karla Faye Tucker was pronounced dead. She was 38 years old. Her four chosen witnesses were Carrie Weeks, Dana Brown, Jackie Aiken, and Ronald Carlson. In the separate observation room designated for the victims' families, Richard Thornton sat in a wheelchair alongside Deborah's son, William Joseph Davis, and stepdaughter, Catherine Thornton. No one was present to represent Jerry Lynn Dean's family. They had not been contacted in time. Richard Thornton looked through the glass at Karla Faye Tucker and said quietly to his late wife, "Here she comes, baby doll. She is all yours." In the days that followed, Captain Fred Allen had overseen more than 120 executions as the head of the Huntsville Death House team. Within days of Tucker's execution, he suffered an emotional breakdown. He resigned his position and forfeited his pension. He permanently reversed his stance on capital punishment. Years later, he told filmmaker Werner Herzog for the 2011 documentary Into the Abyss, "I was pro-capital punishment. After Karla Faye, no sir. Nobody has the right to take another life. I don't care if it's the law." Conservative journalist Tucker Carlson later alleged that Governor Bush had privately mocked Tucker's televised plea during her Larry King interview. Bush denied it. That exchange was never resolved. Jerry Lynn Dean was laid to rest at Tyler Memorial Park in Smith County, Texas, the same county where he was born. Deborah Ruth Thornton was brought home. She was buried at Mifflin Cemetery in Gahanna, Ohio. Ronald Carlson spent the rest of his life opposing all executions, until his own passing. Richard Thornton said he found closure. Two people, the same loss, completely opposite conclusions. Beverly Lowry's book, Steve Earle's off-Broadway play, and Mark Beaver's 2024 Georgia Author of the Year award-winning biography, The Ballad of Karla Faye Tucker. This case has refused, at every turn, to be forgotten. Stephen Griffith, Tucker's first husband, was right. She is famous. Here is the question this case never settled. If someone spends 14 years building an undeniable record of becoming a genuinely different person, does the justice system have any obligation to weigh that? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this is the standard you expect, real people, verified facts, no shortcuts, subscribe. We go this deep every time.